Hello and welcome to Chapter 12. Additional options for organizing essays. These are kind of the odds and ends from the last five, I think, chapters where it was going through essay types. This is going to be a lot of the same type of stuff when it comes to what we're doing with each essay. You're going to see transition words listed again. And of course, we test all of our essays. So keep all that in mind as we go through this, that it's going to be very redundant and similar to the past couple weeks. We're going to be looking at four types of essays: descriptive, process, classification, and definition essays. We're going to start with description essays. And just like the title of it, you are really just describing something. You're saying how it looks, sounds, tastes, smells, or feels. So it's something that appeals to one of the five senses. And you are either going to have an objective description or a subjective description. So an objective description means that your opinions don't come into it. It's literally just think of like a dictionary definition or a scientific study or something like that, where it's just you relaying factual information. The subjective, on the other hand, is going to be your own personal interpretation of whatever it is. You're going to be making value judgments within your description. When we're describing things, a lot of times we like to exaggerate or maybe not be literal. And so we use language that is figurative. And figurative just means that it's not literally true. A lot of times we see this in poetry, but it can come out in your essay writing as well. So, for example, using a simile, like her smile was like sunshine. Her smile isn't literally sunshine, or isn't literally like sunshine, but you're still using a comparison to make a point. A metaphor is the same idea, but it does not use like or as or than. Than is something else that can come up as a simile. But it's just comparing two things. Personification is giving human qualities to non-human things. I think it's very important to stress that it's anything non-human. A lot of times you get this from things like wind or sun, kind of weather type elements, but they don't have to be. So, for example, the wind was singing through the trees. Wind can't literally sing, so that would be personification. Okay, we're going to test essays just the same. You'll be looking for a thesis. In this case, it's going to be just saying the main points of the description and what it is that we're going to be describing. Then you're going to be looking for evidence. For description essays, it's probably going to be spatial in order. So spatial kind of means like space. So it's however we are looking, we're moving through an object in this case. You're going to have some sort of summary statement to conclude things. And of course, we have transition words. Because we're dealing with space and that this is spatially inclined, our transition words are going to be similarly about that, right? So these are all prepositional in nature. A lot of them are, at least between, below. They show relationships of location. If you are going to be writing one, then think about the purpose. So if we have one that is objective, then maybe you're describing a piece of scientific equipment and you are going to be taking each piece of that scientific equipment and talking about it. So in this thesis statement, it says the mass spectrometer is a complex instrument, but each part is ideally suited to its function. And then you can say what each part is, what the function is, and how it achieves that via how it looks or anything like that. If it were art history, then This is going to be a little more value judgment-y. So like if we look at our thesis statement, the disturbing images right there, we have a judgment. And we're going to be proving that through our evidence of what we can take out of our senses. In this case, since it's art, we're probably going to be talking about visuals. Okay, here's some grammar to talk about. So you've already had a quiz over this, but this is one of the hardest or most difficult grammar concepts, and it's modifiers, and our modifiers need to be next to whatever it's modifying. So modifiers are just changing something. And what makes this so hard for us is that our brains tend to figure things out automatically. And when we're speaking, we oftentimes make mistakes in our speaking because we're kind of going off the cuff. It's you're not like writing it down beforehand and proofreading it, being very thorough and everything. And most people can figure out what you mean. And so when it comes time to write, we're so used to that we oftentimes make mistakes. So for example, next to the window outlined in green trim was a dark red aluminum door. Now, we know from reading this, just our brain naturally says, oh, the door is what has the trim. But that's not what the sentence says. The sentence says next to the window outlined in green trim. So notice that the window is the closest thing to outlined in green trim. So it's modifying that right now. So that is a mistake. So we need to move our modifier so that it is closer to the door. And that's what we do here to fix it. Next to the window was a dark red aluminum door outlined in green trim. Okay, so after descriptive, we have process. We have actually already written one of these. This is our process paragraph that y'all have been working on and did previously. So it's just telling you steps. They tend to be chronological in nature, right? So first, second, third, that sort of thing. They are how-to, they are instructions, they're cookbooks. And just the same as ever, we're going to be looking for a thesis statement. It's going to tell us what the process is. Our evidence is going to be all of those details in the processes. Our summary is wrapping things up about the process. What should the conclusion be there? And transitions should tell us the steps. So notice that all of these have to do with time. Then, next, meanwhile, immediately, which makes sense if we're talking about instructions. Okay, some more grammar and context for you. Tense, person, and voice need to be consistent. So if it starts in present tense, it needs to always be in present tense. If it starts in past tense, it needs to always be in past tense. And then person would be first, second, third. So if you start with I and then you go to you, that doesn't work either. It's either all I or all you or all we, he, she, it. A lot of process is going to be in second person. First you do this, then you do that. And this is one of the few types of essays where second person is perfectly acceptable. Finally, we have voice, and that would be active or passive voice. So active voice is where the boy kicked the ball. Okay, so what's the subject of the sentence? The boy. What's he doing? He's kicking something, in this case a ball. That's active. Passive would be the ball was kicked by the boy. What's our subject of that sentence? The ball. What's it doing? Well, it's actually not doing anything. The action's happening to the ball. It's happening to the subject. So the ball was kicked by the boy. That is passive tense. it's better to have one voice throughout. So if we look at our example here, it says make 3 piles, keep, sell, and trash, and one by one, every item should be placed in a pile. So you see that it starts off in active voice, make 3 piles. Okay, but then towards the end, every item should be placed. So our subject here, item, is having the action done to it. So how can we clear this up? Well, there's 2 ways. We could say a pile should be made, keep, selling, trash, and one by one every item should be placed, but that's a little awkward. Usually it's better to stay in active voice, and this is how it would make sense. Make 3 piles, keep, selling, trash, and one by one place each item in a pile. That sounds much stronger and better. Okay, our next type of essay is classification. And this is where you take something, divide it into parts, and sort it. Every category should be different and distinct. So you don't want overlap. It muddies the waters. It's not what you want. And you're really trying to see where things have in common. So think about animals and how they're divided by classifications, if that helps you. Where they're all the trees and everything, you can follow it down, and they branch off and they branch off and they branch off, and all of those branches have something in common. Writer's purpose is going to determine how that classification is split apart. You can test it just like everything else, and we will. So we're going to be looking for a thesis that says what it's going to classify, and also the purpose behind the classification. The evidence is going to be the actual things that prove the classification and make the category distinct. The summary is going to revisit the idea of the categories and how they fit together, so it's zooming out. And then finally, your transition words. So transitions in this case, there's not that many, as you see, because it's just about each individual piece fitting together in relationship to the other. When you're having classification essays, we are thinking about categories, remember. So you're taking a whole, you're breaking it down, and then you're looking at the pieces and how they contribute to the whole again. I like the biology example here a little bit better because it's a little bit more clear. The components of blood, and then explain the function of each. So we have our big category, which is blood, and then we're breaking it down into parts: red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. And then within those, we're saying, okay, well, what makes something a red blood cell versus a white blood cell, for example? We're not comparing them, we're just saying, this is what makes a red blood cell. This is what makes a white blood cell, and so on. For businesses, this one where it's talking about different kinds of courses, this is a little bit trickier because depending on how you break down your classification, you could accidentally have overlapping ones, right? So if I said something too broad like administrative, I may have accounting and management lumped together there, even though maybe I want them to be distinct. Remember, you're going to be listing things, and so let's talk about grammar and how you list stuff. So if you are going to just start listing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a sentence, you begin that list with a colon, that's those 2 dots, and then you have a comma between each item. You need to have a full complete sentence prior to the colon, and then your list is going to be the rest of the sentence. If you're going to be using and in your list, so like Alero and Corvette, comma, neon and probe, comma, that can get confusing. So sometimes you'll see semicolons to set those apart if commas and conjunctions are already being used within your list. That's something to just keep in mind if ever you see. Now we have definition essays. So just, once again, just like the name implies, it is going with the meaning of a term or a concept. Dictionaries, which are formal definitions, they actually have three parts. The first is the term itself. So what is the word or the phrase? And then where does it belong to, the class? And then finally, what are the qualities that make it different from other things in that general class? This one's a little bit weird, so it's somewhat better if we look at some examples. So let's say that we have spaghetti, okay, which is a type of noodle, right? So we're not talking about like spaghetti dinner. We're talking about the actual noodles themselves. The class is it's a pasta. Okay, but that's not good enough because there are other different kinds of pasta. So what is makes spaghetti over something like linguine? It's made in the shape of long, thin strands. You could even go more specific than this, that they are cylinders. They're long, thin cylinders. They're not flat like linguine or something else. Spaghetti would also have probably some sort of diameter attached to it because it's distinct from something like angel hair, for example. So it just depends on how specific you want to get. If we look at sports, we have ice hockey. It's a game, but there are lots and lots of games out there. So what makes it specifically ice hockey? When you're reading a definition essay, you're going to test it. The thesis is going to have the term and why it is they're defining it. What makes it worth spending extra time on in kind of an essay format. Your evidence is going to be the pieces, so it's going to maybe bring up the class, but it's definitely going to be talking about the differentiation piece in there. You are going to revisit at the end not just the meaning but why the author was defining it in the first place. And then your transitions are going to be a little bit more generic for this one. So it's harder to use pure transition words just to get a definition essay in there. There are a few ways that you can develop it. So you can give examples, which would be exemplification, which we've talked about before. Or how something happens, which would be narration or cause and effect. You can describe its appearance. You can compare it or contrast it with something else, or you can talk about its parts. So these are the patterns which define how this type of essay can be broken down. If you're writing one, maybe you're taking a broad generic term like performance arts and you're reflecting on what it actually truly means. Or you're taking something that is used a lot in language but maybe loosely, like natural selection. And we kind of intuitively know what survival of the fittest is, but it's actually it's oftentimes misconceptions within that. And so maybe you're defining it for that reason. Because definitions essays have definition in the name, you may want to begin with a one sentence definition and then you expand on it. It's bad writing to say is when or is where. For example, for me, being street smart is when I know how I protect my possessions. It sounds much stronger if you take that out. For me, being street smart means knowing how to protect my possessions. Or you could just even say is knowing how to protect my possessions. You don't need this is when I know or is where I protect. We don't need the I part in there. Just say it without injecting yourself, and it will sound stronger for it. So to review, description uses your 5 senses, and your goal is to get your reader to kind of agree with your impression. Process is teaching someone how to do something or how something was done. Classification is talking about categories and how something should be broken down. And definition is explaining what something really means. You can test all of these essays to pull out all of the component parts. This was a shorter one this week. We're going towards the end of the class. Hang in there.